Hello and welcome back to Mom's New Identity podcast. I'm your host, Amber Ivana. Let's go ahead and get into today's episode.
Yo soy la madre, I'm the creator. Yo soy la reina, I am the maker. You can bow down now or bow down later. I don't need you to be my validator. I am the healer, la curandera. I'm starting fires, don't need madera. Deep as an ocean, light as a feather. Bring on the dragons, I am the slayer.
You're listening to Mom's New Identity podcast. I'm your host, Amber Ivana, and on this podcast, we'll be discussing topics ranging from the realities and challenges of motherhood and raising a family, healing your inner child, and mental health, and last but certainly not least, tips and education around business and productivity so that you can turn your passions and purpose into a full-time career. So, today's episode is going to be a little bit heavy. I'm going to warn you all, it's going to be talking about mental health, suicide, different things of that nature. So just want to give a trigger warning. Where do I start? I was actually planning on doing something different for this episode. Just talking about, some of the, arbitrary expectations that are put on us as mothers in the United States. And possibly other countries, but I can only speak for the United States, obviously, because I live here. But I keep sighing because, like I said, this episode is going to be really heavy. And it comes on the heels of the Lindsay Clancy story. And if you don't know what that is or who that is, you can Google search it. There's plenty of news articles on it. But just to kind of give you a high-level overview, a mother that lived in Massachusetts killed her 3 children. And as far as all the news stories are reporting, and I'm almost certain that this is the case, she had postpartum psychosis. And if you don't know what that is essentially it's not postpartum depression. It's not postpartum anxiety. It's very different. Postpartum psychosis involves extreme hallucinations. You literally go into psychotic episodes. If you don't know what a psychotic episode is, people can black out in psychotic episodes and not know what they're doing, which is precisely why this mom ended up killing her 3 children. And it's seeing that story and seeing the response on social media, specifically on TikTok, it's just been heart-wrenching because so many moms have been sharing their stories of their postpartum struggles and how they suffered in silence. And what's even more heart-wrenching is the response that a lot of people are saying in the comment section. There's a lot of emphasis on the act that was committed versus considering how did it get to that point? How did it get to that extreme? Now, from what I understand, postpartum psychosis is it's rare that women will get postpartum psychosis. It's not as common as postpartum depression. It's not as common as postpartum anxiety. But if you have a history of, I think it's bipolar disorder in your family, or just similar to that, mood disorders that run in your family, I really don't know a lot of the, I guess you can say, the causes that would lead to postpartum psychosis. I'm sure a quick Google search would do that. I will probably put that in the show notes as well as the description on the YouTube video. But it's starting a conversation about how broken our healthcare system is. And it has always been, specifically around postpartum care. But it breaks my heart This is only now becoming a conversation. And as much as some people don't want to hear this, and some people will say, why you got to bring race into the picture? Because here's the fact, here's the reality, is that this wouldn't have stirred as much attention and media if she was not a white woman. Let's just be real here. It's not about me trying to discriminate. It's just a simple fact. And what's frustrating is that it takes something like this to get an extensive amount of media coverage to have this conversation. And what's worse too is that it's only a conversation that mothers are having, because people who are not mothers, they don't understand. All they see is this woman murdered her children. Why does she deserve any sympathy or compassion? And I get that. I do. Because if you don't have children, or you haven't birthed children, or any of those things, or you haven't experienced postpartum firsthand, or you haven't had a partner that you're very close with who experienced postpartum firsthand, you're not going to understand how challenging that period is. Sorry guys, I'm trying to keep my composure. It's very hard. A lot of the comments that you see on social media, or I should say that I've seen on social media, that often come from people who have not experienced postpartum or don't have someone that they care about and are very close with that experience postpartum of any sort of postpartum mood disorder. A lot of them just see this as a senseless act. That's all they see. And again, I don't blame them. But here's the problem, is instead of arguing your point, instead of all of us trying to argue our points and statements, we need to listen. Especially if you do not have the firsthand experience. It is not our job as humans, as individuals, to tell people who have experienced something that we have not how they're supposed to feel or how they should respond to a situation we have never experienced. That applies for any and everything. And it applies to this too, in postpartum. If you don't understand, it's not your job to speak up about what moms should or shouldn't do. It's your job to fucking listen. I'm doing my best to not get super angry right now. But where do we go from here? That's the real question, is where do we go from here? Do we just let this story fade out and stop caring? What do we do? Well, here are my thoughts. And these are my opinions. But the first thing we need to do is be more honest and open and vulnerable about what we experience in postpartum. We need to start talking to each other. We need to know that it's okay to speak up and that it's okay to say, I'm struggling and I'm feeling this way. It doesn't have to be to a doctor. It doesn't have to be to a therapist. It just has to be someone that you can trust, that loves and cares about your well-being and would only want the best for you. Whether that's your mother, whether it's your best friend, whether it's your spouse, your partner, whomever. You have to speak up. We have to speak up. And if you feel comfortable and you have the platform to do it, speak up about your own experiences. And while that is scary, because putting your shit out there on the internet subjects you to a lot of trolls, a lot of hate. But the fact is, if we continue to stay silent, we're going to continue to suffer in silence. So please please, if you feel comfortable enough to do so, speak up. The next thing is we need to have open and honest conversations about this type of thing with people who have opposing views about this issue. When I say this issue, I'm talking about maternal mental health in the postpartum care in this country. If you know someone who is, I guess, within your circle, and you hear them talking about this issue in a way that does not align with yours, yet you feel very deeply about this and you know this because you've experienced it firsthand, please have the courage to challenge them. You don't have to do it in a way that is attacking them. Obviously, this takes a lot of candor to be able to speak about something with someone whom you share opposing views. In other words, if you are uncomfortable with conflict, this is not going to be easy to challenge other views. But the thing is, if someone who is in your circle shares an opposing view and you feel that you could possibly help them to understand, and again, in a way that is not attacking them, attacking their character, just trying to understand where their mindset is so that you can better help them come to, I guess, the conclusion as to why this is important to have these conversations. But it is very likely that if you come across someone who does not share the same view as you about this issue, again, maternal mental health, and this whole issue with Lindsay Clancy, or in this whole story with Lindsay Clancy, it's very likely that their inner circle shares the same views as them. So if you are able to somehow get through to them and help them to understand why this conversation is important and possibly even sway their mindset about things, that may have a ripple effect and cause them to maybe have the courage to challenge their own inner circle. And I actually have some statistics here that I want to read to you that could possibly help you in that process. And I will also link this website here to on the show notes in the description. I'm just going to kind of read it off here. So if it sounds like I'm reading something, that's why. Did you know that the CDC, so at the national level, the CDC, while they do report maternal mortality rates, they do not report which of those deaths were a result of suicide. It can be found at the state level, I believe, through various states, but at the national level, it's not reported. So if that's not a huge red flag, I mean, come on. But, and I found this because I was actually searching for this and could not find it on accredited websites like the CDC. But anyways, here we go. This is actually from a website called 2020mom.org, and they are a nonprofit organization. So here we go. Here are the facts about maternal suicide. So suicide rates as compared to other maternal deaths. Although there's no national reporting of maternal suicide rates from state data, it is thought that suicide is one of the leading causes of maternal death in the U.S. and is the leading cause of death in countries such as Japan, the UK, and Ireland. Suicide accounts for up to 20% of postpartum deaths. 20%. That's 1 in 5. Suicide is a leading cause of maternal death in the first year following childbirth. You hear that? Not the first month, 2 months, 3 months, because the first 3 months are rough. The first, or they call it the fourth trimester, is rough. No, that said the first year. following childbirth. Maternal suicide deaths are more common than maternal deaths caused by postpartum hemorrhage or hypertensive disorders. Those are essentially diseases that really just come during the pregnancy or postpartum phase. Those things are pretty much out of our control. So the fact that suicide deaths are more common than those disorders, that's scary. Looking at data from 14 state maternal mortality review committees, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention notes mental health conditions, including suicide, are the 6th leading cause of pregnancy-related death. Suicide is among the top 3 causes of pregnancy-associated deaths, as defined by the CDC. In a review of Maternal Mortality Review Committee's data in 14 states, now, mind you guys, it says 14 states. There's 50 states. 50. That's not even half of the states. So imagine how much data isn't even being reported. That's ridiculous. Okay, let's keep going. In a review of Maternal Mortality Review Committee's data in 14 states, mental health conditions, including suicide and overdose, were the underlying cause of 8.8% of pregnancy-related deaths. Maternal suicide risk. Sleep disturbances can increase risk of suicide in depressed postpartum moms. The severity and rapidly evolving nature of postpartum psychosis increases the risk of maternal suicide. Maternal suicide risk is not limited to the immediate postpartum period. It is important to continue providing women the mental health resources and support throughout the later postpartum period. Just a quick side note, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably already know this, but if you don't have children, or you're unfamiliar with the postpartum care in the United States, we pretty much get a 6-week checkup to make sure that we're not dying, that we're healing okay, and that we're not experiencing any severe sort of disorders, but there is no follow-up care after that. Mind you, on the flip side, the child whom we have given birth to, it is encouraged for them to have regular follow-ups throughout the first year of their life. The first 6 months, it's typically every 1 to 2 months wellness checks. And then after that, it's usually up until I think about they turn a year, it's every 3 months roughly. Or at least that's been my experience with my pediatricians. But there's regular and consistent follow-ups that are not only encouraged, but also covered by insurance in most cases for the infant, but not the mother, the person responsible for keeping that infant alive. I'm sorry, the person typically, usually, in most cases, responsible for keeping that infant alive. Okay, let's just think about that. Okay. Though it can happen anytime during pregnancy and the postpartum period, one study found that maternal suicide was most frequently completed between 6 to 12 months postpartum. I'm going to read that again. One study found that maternal suicide was most frequently completed between 6 to 12 months postpartum. If you didn't hear what I just said right now, we don't get any checkups after 6 weeks postpartum, unless we go and we seek help, which it's not something that's just part of the process. Okay. Previous suicide attempts and thoughts about suicidal ideation can be risk factors for maternal suicide completion. I mean, that's pretty obvious. Depressed women who experience childhood physical abuse are at significantly increased risk for frequent thoughts of self-harm. Now, this is important. Maternal suicide and race. Asian women are nearly 9 times as likely to report thoughts of suicide compared to white women in the immediate postpartum period. Black women are 2 times as likely to report thoughts about suicide compared to white women in the immediate postpartum period. Latino women are almost 2 times as likely to report thoughts about suicide compared to white women in the immediate postpartum period. Women who self-report as other race are almost 3 times as likely to report thoughts about suicide compared to white women in the immediate postpartum period. According to deaths from the National Center for Health Statistics, pregnancy-associated suicide is more likely to occur in older non-Hispanic white women. So in other words, those statistics, what they're essentially saying is that women who are women of color are more likely to report thoughts of suicide. Why do you think that is? Take a guess. Why? It's not because they just are, some might call it, mentally weak. We all know that's not the case. I'll let you come to the conclusion as to why that is. But again, I'm going to share this article on the show notes so you can read it for yourself. You can look at this website. They have a lot of resources and information. It looks like their mission is to close gaps in maternal mental health care, period. Well, that's why we're here, right? Having regular access to postpartum care. I think that's great. That's really important. I think this is definitely a cause that we should support. I'm going to share their website and everything, and I'm going to look into this more. So just a quick recap. Some of the things we can do, or my thoughts on some of the things we can do to start to see change in maternal mental health: being more open and honest and vulnerable, and sharing our stories with loved ones, people we trust, people we can confide in. The next thing was challenging at least the people close to us, ideally in person, because online really doesn't make a difference. People just want to argue their point online. So in person, people that you know, if they share differing views, or I should say opposing views than yours, and your view is that of promoting change in this area in maternal mental health and just healthcare overall, really, then I'd encourage you to have a candid conversation with them and challenge them. See what you can do to possibly sway them into a place of understanding and wanting to help. And the last thing kind of goes hand in hand with what I just stated, but we need to start voting in a way that considers all mothers. And the last thing, and I'm going to read this quick excerpt from this book called Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. It's a really good book. If you consider yourself an ally, an anti-racist, a feminist, you need to read this book, period. But I'm going to read this, and I'll let you interpret what she's trying to say here. So, though white women as a whole are far from politically homogenous, they do have families and social lives that involve heavy interaction with their political opposites. Conversations that can largely be summed up as being about national security, the economy, and upholding the standards of their community and religious institutions, are tabled in favor of family unity. In other words, they don't want to talk about politics. They just want to keep peace. So they don't talk about it. That means the same aunt who's voting pro-life, anti-LGBTQIA, pro-guns, and anti-immigrant is spending the holidays prepping side dishes with her more progressive niece, who is pro-choice, pro-LGBTQIA, and also pro-refusing to do anything to attempt to sway that aunt or the children that aunt is raising. Whew. Man, when I read that, I was like, damn. Whoo, man, I got chills. Again, this is the book. If you didn't see it, this is the book right here. This is the book. In other words, what she's saying is, white women, if you consider yourself an ally, someone that wants to see change in this country that benefits all people, not just a select group, it is yours, and I should really say ours, because I am also half white. I'm half Mexican, but regardless, I'm half white and I'm white passing. We have a responsibility to start having conversations with people who have opposing political views, to really come to a place of helping them understand why voting a certain way, voting in a way that only benefits them, it's not going to have a good outcome in the long run. Obviously, we saw that recently in 2016. The group majority responsible for voting Donald Trump into office was white women, middle-aged white women. Those same white women who were livid about Roe v. Wade being overturned. I say they, right? Because I don't associate with those women. Soy Latina. No entiendo por qué son así. Pero, okay, so let me just throw that out there. Just kidding. No, but seriously, we have to stop being passive. We need to start using our privilege to help encourage change in this country. And that means having some very candid conversations with people who are just kind of the ones who are more likely to be swayed are the ones that are just kind of like, I don't care about politics. I don't want to talk about politics. I don't care about that shit. You don't care because your life is not being impacted. You don't feel that your life is literally at risk depending on what president is sitting in office. And I mean, I don't know what it's going to take for those people who are just like indifferent to actually give a shit. But sometimes it takes their own lives being at risk. And I hate that it has to get to that point, but that's the reality. So we have to take this tragic story of Lindsay Clancy and use it as fuel to activate, start having conversations, to start saying things that are really fucking uncomfortable. And yeah, it's easy for me to say things like this because I'm talking to a camera. I'm not talking to a person. But you know what? I'm putting myself out there by saying things that are quote unquote controversial. And honestly, so be it. If this means that you go and you decide to unfollow me, I don't know what to tell you. I was never going to convince you anyways. So I think that about covers it for this episode. And so I really hope that this episode gave you the courage maybe to start speaking out about these issues, maybe in whatever way that looks like for you. If that's being vulnerable and open about your own story in whatever way that feels comfortable to you, whether it's on a public platform like social media or with your closest loved ones. Maybe you're in the thick of it and you're struggling and you're too scared to come forward and to say something. I hope that you decide to do it for yourself, for your kids. It's scary because a lot of times the response is, well, I don't want them to take my kids. I don't want them to take my kids. And I get that. Unfortunately, I can't say that that doesn't happen because it does. I wish it didn't. In the perfect world, women could speak up and say, hey, I'm struggling with these thoughts. And they would immediately be understood and taken seriously. But that's just not the world that we live in. So it might take time for you to seek help, but I hope that you don't wait until it's too late. So, oh man, that was a heavy episode. So if you're still here and you're listening, I just want to thank you for taking time to listen, but also I hope that you will continue to be part of this community. You can join us on, join us, whatever, on social media, Instagram, TikTok. I will at some point, when I kind of get things more in order, look at doing lives on a regular basis, probably on Instagram, since there's not like a minimum follower requirement, but just lives, just so we can talk, interact, so I can hear your stories and hear about what's important to you all, or at least those of you that are listening. So you can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and also on YouTube. You can watch the video on YouTube if you'd rather watch it there. But again, I thank you so much for being here, and I hope that you'll continue to join in the conversation and start prioritizing your mental health and your wellness and your healing. Because when we as mothers, or just as people, whether or not you have children, start to heal, we can heal the world. So until next time, I'll see you later. Mom's New Identity podcast is written, directed, and produced by your host, Amber Ivana. Intro music, Madre Creator, is written, produced, and performed by Heidi Rojas Music.